Are you the quantum mechanics?
Yes, we are the Quantum Mechanics, the paranormal podcast for the believers, the doubters, and everybody in between.
We are indeed. I got a lovely piece of spam this week.
Oh, it's nice though, isn't it? With egg?
No, with internet. It was brilliant. I got a message saying, "Congratulations, the Quantum Mechanics. You are in the top 15 mechanics podcasts."
Oh, we should be celebrating.
Click the link and you can download a badge. I'm like, yeah, right. You're not a scam, are you?
What is a mechanics podcast
That's what
anyway?
I thought, yeah. And it did make me think, if it was the Quantum Mechanics podcast, we're not even in the top 10.
Yeah. Well, there is another one, I think, called the Quantum Mechanics, but I think it's got like 3 episodes and it's Oxford University.
Yeah, no, it's a proper thing.
And it really is
Mechanics.
they know what they're talking about.
Yeah, but top 15?
Yeah,
Although,
out of 2 podcasts.
Yeah, exactly. But yes, I assume that was a spam. Probably works better if you're a true crime podcast, right?
That's true.
You probably do click.
But that sounds like it would be an algorithm which said something like, you're the top 15 of the true podcasts.
Yeah.
You know, it would be something like that. The pub that we record in, there's one of those like review things which seems to be auto-generated. And it says, people come here because of the food and they recommend the service, despite the fact it has never served food. And the best thing you'll get is a packet of crisps in terms of things to eat.
The service is good.
The service is good, of course. But you have to. There's so many of these auto-generated things that make absolutely no sense. Like half of the internet appears to be AI slop drivel.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about AI a little bit today.
Are we?
A little bit. But yes, we are in the top 15 of mechanics podcasts.
Excellent.
So we can congratulate ourselves.
We'll get our T-shirts done.
Now, before I get into the episode, I think it's a good time, after what we've just been talking about, I want to thank everyone for choosing to listen to the Quantum Mechanics Paranormal Podcast.
Well, that's very nice of you to say.
And Ben, I also wanted to thank you for choosing to make this podcast with me.
Oh, well, it's been a pleasure.
Well, I'm not going to thank you.
Because
after hearing this episode, you might come to the conclusion, Ben, that you had absolutely no choice in the matter.
Sometimes life does feel that way.
Now, this episode really started, I guess, a couple of weeks ago when we discussed retroactive precognition and the experiments by Daryl Bem.
Yeah.
If you've not listened to it, go back. It's a couple of weeks ago, have a listen. It's good. But basically, Daryl Bem's experiments suggested that events in the future can influence your decision-making in the past.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes, that makes sense.
And when we did that episode a couple of weeks ago, we thought, if that's true, it has implications relating to the idea of consciousness and free will. We only briefly talked about it, but I remember you brought it up. So I thought, let's look into that a bit more. Should we start with the definition of what consciousness is?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start, because I don't think everyone agrees on exactly what it is. And in fact, it's changed through history quite a bit, hasn't it?
It has. I'm not going to go into that much detail. My dictionary definition that I looked up was one of those. Consciousness is like when you're conscious. Yeah, thanks.
Excellent.
Yeah, thanks. I thought what I'd do is ask something that wasn't or is not supposed to be conscious, AI, what it thinks it is. And this is what it gave me. Consciousness is the state of being aware of and able to think about one's own existence, thoughts, feelings, and surroundings. It encompasses awareness, perception, and self-reflection. Thought that was quite good.
That's not bad, is it? Yeah.
So at this point, I thought I'd push my luck with the AI, and I asked it if it had consciousness. And yes. Now, unsurprisingly, the answer was, no, I do not have consciousness. I am an artificial intelligence designed to process and generate text based on patterns in data. I lack self-awareness, emotions, and subjective experience. My responses are driven by algorithms rather than conscious thought. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. So there was nothing too Skynet scary in there for me.
No, good.
I thought I'd push it again. I asked it whether it would like consciousness.
That's kind of like the question to Data in Star Trek, isn't it?
Yeah. Would you like emotions?
Yeah, I think it probably said yes, didn't it?
Didn't really care.
Didn't care.
It was like, not fast. Well, it wasn't quite like that, but that was the summary.
Excellent. Okay, which AI was that?
That was ChatGPT.
Oh, right. Okay.
It did think though that humans have consciousness, but it was a little more patchy when I asked it whether humans have free will.
Oh.
It said, the question of whether humans have free will is a complex and debated topic in philosophy. It's also debated in psychology and neuroscience. Here are some perspectives. So you talked about there's different views on this, gave me a summary of those. There's the libertarian view. This perspective argues that humans possess free will and can make choices independent of prior causes. Proponents believe individuals have the capacity to act accordingly to their own volition. That's libertarian view. We certainly do have free will.
I think that's probably what most people would say.
I think that's what most people would say. Then there's determinism. This view holds that every event, including human actions, is determined by preceding events and natural laws. According to determinists, free will is an illusion, as choices are influenced by genetics, environment, and past experiences. Similar to that is materialism. We've talked about that on the podcast before. This is a philosophy that believes that physical matter is the fundamental substance of reality and that all phenomena, including consciousness and thought, arise from material interactions.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Then we have compatibilism, which is quite hard to say. Some philosophers argue for compatibilism, which suggests that free will and determinism can coexist. They propose that free will is defined by the ability to act accordingly to one's motivations and desires, even if those are influenced by external factors. You said most of us would probably go for the libertarian. I was more drawn to that compatibilism one because, of course we're influenced by other factors, but we've still got free will, surely.
Okay, so that's that one that you just described, that mixture of the two. That's like, I'm hungry, should I go to McDonald's or should I go and buy some food in the shop and cook it?
Yes, and interestingly, we're going to do a little thing around that in a minute.
Okay.
So, let's summarise that. Libertarian view, I'm free to do what I want any old time. That's my summary.
The soup dragon philosophy.
Determinism, life's but a walking shadow, an illusion, insubstantial and fading.
Nihilist.
Materialism, we're all made of stars.
Right.
And compatibilism, I look at life from both sides now.
Right, okay.
So we're the only podcast that can get from the Rolling Stones or the Soup Dragons to Moby to Joni Mitchell via Shakespeare. I just wanted to do that for absolutely no reason, but that was my summary.
No, that's very good. That is very good indeed. We should have a soundboard with a round of applause on it.
Thank you.
So I'm just trying to work out which category dogs would go into. I think they'd go into compatibilism, I think.
There is research that says that dogs do have consciousness, but again, free will, who knows? Let's look at consciousness from a neurological perspective. Research in neuroscience has raised questions about the timing of decision-making processes in the brain, suggesting that unconscious processes might influence choices before they reach our conscious awareness. Which leads me nicely to an experiment I want to talk about called the Libet experiment. I don't know if you've heard of this.
I have not.
Now, this experiment has been touted as potentially proof that we do not have free will. Or to quote the 19th century materialist, T.H. Huxley, we are conscious automata. That seems like a bit of a contradiction in terms, doesn't it?
I was just trying to process that. Yes, it does.
But many believe that, yes, we are conscious of making decisions, but really our brain has already made a choice for us based on other factors. Consciousness is simply being aware a choice has been made.
Right, okay.
So it's basically a trick of a brain that makes us think we had free will to make the choices we do. But
like being in the passenger seat of a car where you know you're turning left, but you didn't instigate it.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Now, Steve Taylor for Scientific America puts it nicely. Our sense of making choices or decisions is just an awareness of what the brain has already decided for us. When we become aware of the brain's actions, we think about them and falsely conclude that our intentions have caused them.
Okay, so we're kind of fooling ourselves.
The Libet experiment, which we're going to come on to, became the poster boy for that viewpoint. Many people believe, Steve Taylor says, that evidence for a lack of free will was found when in the 1980s scientist Benjamin Libet conducted experiments that seemed to show that the brain registers the decision to make movements before a person consciously decides to move. In Libet's experiments, participants were asked to perform a simple task, such as pressing a button or flexing a wrist. Sitting in front of a timer, they were asked to note the moment at which they were consciously aware of the decision to move. EEG electrodes were attached to their head, monitoring their brain activity. Libet showed consistently that there was unconscious brain activity associated with the action, a change in EEG signals that Libet called readiness potential. This happened for an average of half a second before the participants were aware of the decision to move.
This is a little bit like I was talking about. This would fit into the model of the daemon driving the human carriage, basically.
Yeah, not the Damon Hill.
Let's not go there again.
So let's look at this. So Ben, if I asked you to press a button whenever you choose to,
yes,
your brain patterns indicate your brain decided to make that movement half a second before you actually decided.
Right. Okay. Which means this does tie into what you were talking about in your last episode, where you're sort of seeing into the future in a way.
Yeah. I'm going to talk about that a little bit in a minute, actually, so you're with me. So this experiment appears to offer evidence that decisions are made by the brain first, and there's a delay before we become conscious of them, at which point we attribute our own conscious intentions to the acts. Basically suggests there's no such thing as free will. We're just fooling ourselves. Because the decision's been made, we just think we've made the decision.
Yeah.
So, yes, you're right, Ben. It was at this point I got overexcited because I started to think about that episode we did on retroactive precognition a couple of weeks ago.
But you got overexcited half a second before you thought you got overexcited.
I really did, yeah. So, Daryl Bem's experiment that we talked about a couple of weeks ago seemed to show that certain people had an uncanny ability to predict future events before they actually occurred. So, basically, they were given a screen that had two curtains in front of it. They were told that one of them had a picture behind it and to choose whether it was on the left or the right. They'd make their choice. What they didn't know is the picture and the positioning of the picture was not chosen until afterwards. And the episode goes into detail about how erotic images or extreme nasty images make this ability
high emotional response.
Yeah, that makes this ability, especially among people who are regarded as extroverts, it makes it more potent.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I started thinking, if you go with Libet's experiment and his conclusion that our brain makes a decision to do something before we decide to use free will to make that choice, and if we accept Daryl Bem's conclusion that humans can make a correct decision on an event in the future, I started to wonder if Daryl Bem and Libet were tapping into the same phenomena. I mean, I don't think anybody's connected these two things, but it does make a lot of sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
It seems very similar.
Yeah.
And I started to think that could certainly link to paranormal phenomena as well. It could suggest, okay, this is a scary one I'm going to go into now. Could suggest that everything we do is pre-mapped out for us, whether it be deciding to move our finger in one experiment or correctly choosing between two pictures that have not been chosen yet. I started to think it could support the idea that we live in a simulated universe. That
would be a very rational conclusion to that, because you're living along to an algorithm, and that algorithm has predetermined movements within it. Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, it suggests that our brain could have all the information about our whole life already stored in it, couldn't it? Yes. We only become consciously aware of it when it's time for us to know, or we make the choice that triggers it.
Yeah, that would make sense. Or if time is an illusion and we are just perceiving what we're able to perceive, but the past and the future is happening all at once.
Coming on to that one.
Oh, right.
You're reading ahead. Good.
Sorry.
You're with me. Good. Well, it shows that it's all pre-programmed in there, Ben.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Yeah, this is making my head hurt a little bit because it also goes on to that. It plays to that notion that some people say that people choose to be incarnated and they make their life pattern, they make their life choices. Although I find it hard to believe that you would, sitting wherever you were in the waiting room to come back, and you go, right, March the 18th, little finger, move it 13 centimetres to the right.
Yeah.
That seems... Would you go into that much detail?
Well, let's think about this from a simulation point of view. Let's take us deciding to make this podcast.
Yeah.
It would have always been in our programming that if certain circumstances arose, we would make a paranormal podcast together.
Yeah.
And they did. We met, we found out we had shared interests and skills, and the code in our brain kicked in and told us to make a podcast. If we'd never met, or the circumstances weren't right, that code may never have been activated, and one or both of us would never have made a podcast ever.
That makes sense, yeah.
I also wondered if there was an element of AI in our programming. It would explain why some of us, as in those precognition experiments, are better than others at it, or we get things wrong, as we know AI often can, as I will highlight a little bit later.
Okay, yes.
So all this would suggest there's no such thing as free will. But Ben, you're right. If we looked at these two experiments in a different way, let's assume that we do have consciousness and free will. Exactly what you said, Ben. Maybe what Libet and Daryl Benn were tapping into is a phenomena about time being non-linear.
Yeah.
It could suggest we do have free will, and our brain made a conscious free will decision to move its finger or choose a picture in the future.
Yeah.
We took that free will decision in the future, but it only became consciously aware of to us in the past. Hence why you would have this split second.
But what's the entity
firing in
making
the
the
brain.
decision then?
Well, it's still you. It's just that time doesn't work in that linear way. I mean, it still suggests everything is mapped out in a way, does it not?
It does, but it also, by that logic, says that your consciousness spans a particular time. It sort of sees into the future and exists in the present.
Yes, well, that's assuming there is such a thing as the past, the present, and the future.
Yeah, true. Yeah, it does, yeah.
So for instance, if I asked you to press the button when you wanted it to, and you make a decision using your free will in the future, but somewhere in your brain it registers in the past half a second earlier, which is why you get the brain activity before you actually press the button, because time isn't linear.
Right.
There's no such thing as past, present, and future. For me, both theories tap into the paranormal. If our life is pre-planned or we make decisions based purely on data rather than free will, it would suggest we are a character in a simulation or a product of AI, right? And if we go with the theory that we use free will to make decisions in the future, that suggests retroactive precognition exists and that time is not linear. Now, before we get too carried away, there were some problems with Libet's experiments. Firstly, the fact that Libet's experiments required the participant to say when they made the conscious decision to move their finger or press the button. Now, just because the brain activity happened half a second before the participant said they made the conscious decision does not prove the brain knew before they did.
When measuring the time it takes to speak rather than...
Yes, or there's a few. There may be a delay between the impulse to act and you're consciously recording it. Your recollection of when you made the decision could kind of be an echo of when you actually did. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do, yes.
And because of the nature of the experiment, it meant that a person had to decide they were going to move their finger, then move it to press a button. Those are two separate actions, right?
Right.
So the brain activity could have been measuring that first phase. I'm going to press the button now. press the button.
Yeah.
Two separate actions, right? Other researchers have pointed out something similar, a potential interpretation problem with the experiment. Libet assumed that the rush of brain activity half a second before the participants made their choice indicated the brain had already made the choice for them. But it might be something else. Maybe the participant looked at the button before deciding to push it, and that is the brain activity that was recorded. Or it is the brain preparing the finger to make a choice to move. I started thinking about this a bit like a car with an adaptive gearbox. If you're in third gear and the gearbox is already ready to select fourth or second, isn't it? Depending on whether you hit the accelerator or press the brake.
Yes.
It doesn't wait for you to make the decision. It preempts one of the two outcomes that's going to happen.
Oh, I see what you mean. So we've got sort of responses being lined up, ready to go.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And that is possibly what Libet was recording with the brain activity.
I mean, from an evolutionary point of view, that makes perfect sense, particularly if we're trying to hunt or do a task which is dependent on moving swiftly.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, maybe what Libet captured was the brain preparing to make its decision, almost warming the engine up in a way.
Yeah, warming the engine up. Yeah, I like that. That's a slightly less, I was going to say the word ominous. It's not quite ominous, but it sort of feels a little easier to understand when it's put that way.
Yeah. Well, psychiatrist and philosopher Ian McGilchrist also put forward a different theory for Libet's results. He says, if one imagines that for me to decide something, I have to wield it with the conscious part of my mind, perhaps my unconscious is every bit as much me. So he puts forward this idea that the participant first made a subconscious decision to move their finger before the conscious part of the brain kicked in. I was thinking about this. It kind of shows how you can be influenced by subconscious things. I remember reading a book, can't remember the author's name, a long time ago about some of the psychology behind shopping. And there was a good example in the book with food shops in airports, that they are often placed on the right-hand side as you're walking.
Oh, yeah, that's true, yeah.
I mean, not all airports do, but a lot of them do.
Yeah.
And this is because, certainly in Western culture, research shows we look more to our right than our left. And we also tend to walk more over to the left-hand side, certainly in airports. And we are more likely to cross over the traffic coming the other way for food than we are for non-essential purchases.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So your subconscious in that sense is being manipulated to influence your conscious decision to get a coffee or a sandwich.
It is. I wonder, though, that's it. That makes a lot of sense. But has anybody tried it the other way round? Because I reckon I could probably make quite a lot of money if I said, I'm the expert at planning food malls in airports, and here's my detailed psychological theory.
Yeah.
Which is much better than, I'm just going to put the pret-a-manger wherever I think the pret-a-manger should look best.
Yeah.
And I wonder if anyone has done the latter, and it's turned out absolutely exactly the same.
Yeah.
So you have to sort of read through the possible signal noise in these comments, I think.
Although I do remember reading, I think it was somewhere like chemists and stuff like that. If you sell two types of shampoo and you want to push one type, you're better off selling three types. That if there's more choice, your brand sticks out more. I can't remember the exact way it works, but if there's a stronger brand, you're more likely to pick it if there are three options rather than two, which is weird.
Yeah, I sort of feel that makes sense in my head as well.
And the other one is why, again, not all supermarkets are like this, but milk is usually towards the back of the shop because it's an essential, so they want you to walk through the supermarket to get it.
Yeah, they do, don't they? Yeah. Okay, that I can totally buy.
So we can be manipulated. So I guess the point, bringing it back to Libet's experiment, maybe he was measuring our subconscious kicking in to go, I'm going to move my finger now, rather than a conscious decision. That doesn't mean we didn't have free will, does it? Well, I guess you can argue it either way.
You can argue it either way. It depends which starting philosophy you set
go
out
with,
with.
yeah. Well, let's stick with the idea that there is no such thing as free will. I tried to find out the most prominent and famous person that believed in that concept. I went back to AI for that. And it took me down a real rabbit hole.
Oh.
Because when I asked the AI for influential people who did not believe in free will, Einstein came up. And AI gave me a quote from Albert Einstein. It's a really interesting quote. I do not believe in free will. I think that we are all connected to a vast cosmic web of interdependent events. I'm a reasonable researcher, I think. I'm not the best. You're better than me, but I'm all right. I thought there's something about that I don't really buy. So I thought I need a second source to confirm
that doesn't
that
sound
quote.
like his words.
Yeah. So I went looking for a second source to confirm that quote. Couldn't find one.
Ah.
When I asked AI if that really was a quote from Einstein, it basically said, oh, sorry, I got confused. I got it wrong. Made it up.
It hallucinated.
I used various things that he might have said to put a quote together. I said, can you please give me a genuine Einstein quote? And it gave me this. I am convinced that the only thing that can be said about free will is that it is a concept that we have created for the purpose of social order.
And that is real.
Couldn't find another source again.
Oh.
I asked it again, and it basically told me, no, I made it up again.
Oh, for goodness sake.
And we know what the definition of insanity is, don't we, Ben?
You did it again.
Yeah, but that's not an Einstein quote either, by the way.
Is it not?
No, it's not. It's misappropriated to him, quite famously.
Because I think the real definition of insanity is eating angel delight out of your shoes at 2 a.m.
Yeah. Well, that was a quote from Einstein.
Yeah. Well, he famously loved running and angel delight.
Yeah. I'm trying to find the context of that, but I'm afraid to ask.
Well, in my long running, trying to get a different shoe type into every episode.
Right, fair enough. Perhaps AI does have free will after all. It's definitely lied to me at least twice during the research.
Didn't I tell you it lies? It does lie all the time.
Incredible. Well, certainly Einstein's work and belief in determinism could lead you to believe that he might be sceptical about the concept of free will. But I can understand why he and others might want to keep that quiet. Ruthie, one of our Patreons, recommended an article from the Guardian newspaper written by Oliver Berkman titled The Clockwork Universe, Is Free Will an Illusion? Really good article. Some really interesting stuff in the article. But one of the first things that struck out for me is that having a belief or questioning whether we have free will is a controversial topic and can open you up for death threats.
Really? How so?
Well, one of the people the journalist in the article interviewed for the piece was philosopher Galen Strawson. And before they started the interview, Strawson asked the journalist, have you spoken to anyone else who's received weird emails? Which is a weird way to start an interview, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we do a paranormal podcast. We definitely have.
We have. We've had a few. Strawson then showed the journalist a raft of abusive emails he received, including, last year you all played a part in destroying my life. Another email Strawson received said, I lost everything because of you. My son, my partner, my job, my home, my mental health, all because of you. You told me I had no control. I was not responsible for anything I do. How my beautiful 6-year-old son was not responsible for what he did. Goodbye, and good luck with the rest of your cancerous, evil, pathetic existence.
Okay.
Another.
What on earth?
Your wife, your kids, your friends. You've smeared all their achievements, you utter effing prick.
What, these are emails to a philosopher?
Yeah. Strawson started to receive progressively more threatening emails, culminating in, I'm going to F you up. And then 2 days after that one, hello, I'm coming for you. This was the one where he had got the police involved, and I think they traced who was sending a lot of the emails, and he said the violent threats ceased after that.
Right.
But this was all because the philosopher had endorsed the theory that humans may not have free will and that free will is an illusion. So expressing his thought led to abuse and, I guess, veiled death threats.
Why would anyone take it that seriously? It's so weird.
Yeah. Well, as a philosopher, he was quite philosophical.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're going to death threat anyone, I guess.
He said, I think for these people, it's just an existential catastrophe.
Oh.
He said, and I think I can see why. The difficulty explaining the enigma of free will to those unfamiliar with the subject isn't that it's complex or obscure, the journalist Oliver Berkman writes. It's that the experience of possessing free will, the feeling that we are the authors of our choices, is so utterly basic to everyone's existence that it can be hard to get enough mental distance to see what's going on. Suppose you find yourself feeling moderately hungry one afternoon. So you walk to the fruit bowl in your kitchen, where you will see an apple and one banana.
You walk to the fruit bowl, sure. I mean, he's lost me already.
As it happens, you choose the banana. But it seems absolutely obvious that you were free to choose the apple or neither or both instead. That is free will, yeah?
Yeah.
Were you to rewind the tape of world history to the instant just before you made your decision, with everything in the universe exactly the same, you'd have been able to make a different choice. Nothing could be more self-evident. And yet, according to a growing chorus of philosophers and scientists who have a variety of different reasons for their view, it also can't possibly be the case. This sort of free will is ruled out simply and decisively by the laws of physics, says one of the most strident of the free will skeptics, the evolutionary biologist Jerry Cohn. Leading psychologists such as Steven Pinker and Paul Bloom agree, as apparently did the late Stephen Hawking, along with numerous prominent neuroscientists, including Viz Ramachandran, who called free will an inherently flawed and incoherent concept. And according to the public intellectual, I don't know what a public intellectual is. What is a public intellectual?
I don't know. Like, well, the
Does
opposite.
that mean
I
you
guess.
tell people about it? How do you become a private intellectual?
Yeah, that's true.
I used to be a public intellectual, but I'm just keeping out of it now. I'm doing it in private.
You just shut the door and then be really clever.
So Noah Harari, he believes free will is an anachronistic myth, useful in the past perhaps as a way of motivating people to fight against tyrants or oppressive ideologies, but rendered obsolete by the power of modern data science to know us better than we know ourselves, and thus to predict and manipulate our choices. And from the 1980s onwards, various specific neuroscientific findings have offered troubling clues that our so-called free choices might actually originate in our brains several milliseconds or even much longer before we're first aware of thinking of them. Hopefully he's thinking of more than just the Libet experiment. Sam Harris, who is the author of the 2012 best-selling book Free Will, and others have touched on why it is a subject with huge implications, an idea that is hard for us to accept. Were free will to be shown to be non-existent, and we were truly to absorb that fact, it would precipitate a culture war far more belligerent than ones that have been waged on the subject of evolution, Harris writes. Arguably, we'd be forced to conclude that it was unreasonable ever to praise or blame anyone for their actions, since they weren't truly responsible for deciding to do them, or to feel guilt for one's misdeeds, or pride in one's accomplishments, or gratitude for others' kindness. As we might come to feel that it's morally unjustifiable to mete out retributional punishment to criminals, since they had no ultimate choice about their wrongdoing. Some worry that it might fatally corrode all human relations, since romantic love, friendship, and neighbourly civility alike all depend on the assumption of choice. Any loving or respectful gesture has to be voluntary for it to count. I'm not sure I agree totally with that. People do good things, they do get something back from it. I don't think it's totally voluntary. Do you know what I mean?
I do, yeah. I mean...
It's a small point, but it did...
Yeah, it goes back to like what drives altruism, but again, I would argue that it's evolution, because without altruism, you can't function as a society. So, yeah.
Again, though, that wouldn't necessarily mean you had free will in doing it.
No, true.
So Sam Harris, who I mentioned earlier, he's got a podcast called Free Will. It's such a thing. He's got a trigger warning at the start of his podcast, warning listeners that they may find the concepts emotionally distressing.
I think I'd manage.
Yeah, we'll go with it. Professor,
I'd be clubbing in sirens testing.
You're doing well at getting that in every week, aren't you?
Yep.
We're going to keep that going. Professor of philosophy Saul Silansky has studied and explored the idea and has come to the conclusion that free will does not exist, but warns that it is crucial that people continue to believe that it does exist. This is interesting. He says, on the deepest level, if people really understood what was going on, and I don't think I fully internalised the implications myself, even after all these years, it's just too frightening and difficult. For anyone who's morally or emotionally deep, it's really depressing and destructive. It would really threaten our sense of self, our sense of personal value. The truth is just too awful here, he says.
I just don't understand why it's so awful.
In reading his stuff, he almost feels like he'd wish he'd never looked into it. That's the impression I got from reading his stuff. He teaches it as part of his philosophy. Yeah, his philosophy teaching. He sits down with the students at the start and he just says, look, this is going to be really tough. You may, if he's unsure about a student, he'll say, look, I'd rather you didn't take the course. Because once you dig into it, it's really going to affect you. I mean, that could say more about how it's affected him than anyone else.
But what's the idea that's so disturbing?
I guess that you've got no choice in anything you do.
But who is driving the choice? That's the thing that would be the disturbing thing. It's only disturbing if, does it mean that you as an entity have no free will? There's a difference between someone else doing it or that last point that you made when you were describing the different sorts of free will, the objective, what did you call it?
Yeah.
Basically the object-orientated one.
Yeah.
That's not awful. If it was like, you're being driven by, I don't know, some sort of supernatural third party.
Yeah.
That's disturbing.
We're almost going down that philosophy of that, I think he was the keyboard player in Spinal Tap. Do you remember his famous quote? He didn't say anything, I don't think, through the whole thing. And they interviewed him. He said, what's your philosophy on life? And he went, have a good time all of the time. That's my philosophy.
Well, that's all right, you
it's
see.
kind of like what you're saying, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's quite interesting when I talked about the bowl of fruit and having free will, because that gets picked up again. And it's something you said really interests me. There are philosophical, so this is back to the journalist Berkman's article. He said there are psychological reasons for you feeling hungry in the first place. And there are causes in your genes, your upbringing, or your current environment for you choosing to address your hunger with fruit rather than a box of donuts.
Dang.
You've fallen into his trap there, haven't you?
I have.
You would have gone for the donuts, right?
No, the cheese.
Oh, yeah, there you go. If your preference for the banana over an apple at the moment of supposed choice must have been caused by what went before, presumably including the pattern of neurons firing in your brain, which was itself caused, and so on, back in an unbroken chain to your birth, the meeting of your parents, their birth, and eventually the birth of the cosmos.
Wow.
Now, that's a big concept, but you know what the first thing that came into my mind when I read that? So this is like even the decision, if you go with it, even the decision to go for a banana rather than an apple goes back to the birth of the cosmos, right?
Right.
Made me think of that dual slit experiment that uses starlight.
Yeah.
Because that, the dual slit experiment, we've talked about it a lot, so I'm not going to summarise it again, but there was a version of it made, and the conclusion, they did it using starlight, and the conclusion was the starlight must have known that millions of years later, when it was passed through one of the slits, it knew whether it was going to be observed or not.
Yeah.
which does tie into that fact that if everything's planned out, it's been planned out since the birth of the cosmos.
When you put it like that, I'm going back to Nick Bostrom and simulation theory.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, I don't find that too disturbing. I mean, it's not ideal, I suppose.
Yeah.
I don't know what I think about it. I've thought about it so much, I don't know what to think about it anymore.
Well, this idea that the Professor Saul Smilansky puts forward, that if free will does not exist, then it's in all our best interests to convince everybody that it does, he calls this illusionism. So maintaining the illusion we do have free will. The approach that if we believe free will does not exist, we should keep it to ourselves, seems to have been borne out by an experiment in 2008, where Catherine Voys and Jonathan Schuler conducted an experiment with two separate groups. They asked the first group to read excerpts from The Astonishing Hypothesis, written by Francis Crick. In the book, Crick, who was the co-discoverer of DNA, suggests that free will is an illusion. So one of these test groups read excerpts from that book about free will, right? The second test group did not. Those who read the passage suggesting free will was an illusion were more likely to cheat in a test where money was at stake.
Oh, really?
Yes. Other researchers reported a diminished belief in free will to less willingness to volunteer to help others, to lower levels of commitment in relationships, and lower levels of gratitude. So people who do not believe in the concept of free will are less moralistic, I guess, or less willing or more selfish, maybe. So this is why they're saying we need to keep the illusion going.
If you speak to perhaps a very religious person, they would say everybody is doing God's will, but you do have free will, which is how you can commit sin, because I can't exactly remember how the philosophy goes, but if you have what is the good of being good if you didn't have the option to be bad?
Yeah, yeah.
That is the religious connotation. That's the religious environment with which this topic is discussed, I guess.
Yeah.
For me, it comes back to, if you don't have free will, then what do you have?
Yeah, yeah. And why?
And why, yeah.
Yeah.
Does anybody suggest that it is a third party?
It seemed to me there was there's no free will extreme, which is everything's pre-mapped since the beginning of the cosmos, right? And then there seems to be what I'd call no free will light, which is, well, we're completely influenced by external factors and other things that have gone on, which, yeah, it would mean there's no free will, but, a bit like my walking across the line of traffic coming the other way to get a Starbucks coffee. Yeah, maybe you saw advertising and that made you get the coffee, but that doesn't seem as bad as it was always planned that you were going to get a coffee from, the minute you were born. But the author Sam Harris, who wrote the book on free will, the last guy is basically, if we don't convince everyone that we do, even though we don't, the whole world's going to collapse. The author Sam Harris has a more optimistic view. He argues that if we fully grasp the case against free will, it would be difficult to hate other people. How can you hate someone you don't blame for their actions?
Yeah, that's very true.
He also says love would survive largely unscathed, since love is the condition of our wanting those we love to be happy or being made happy ourselves by that ethical and emotional connection, neither of which would be undermined. Which I think is a good point.
Yeah, it is a good point.
And he also says countless other positive aspects of our life would be untouched. Philosopher Galen Strawson seems to agree. In a world without a belief in free will, he says, this is a brilliant quote, strawberries would still taste just as good.
That is very philosophical. If we didn't have free will, what would be the point of incentives? What would be the point of me training my dog using bits of chicken? Because what you're trying to do is he's got the choice to come to you or not come to you.
Yeah.
And the chicken enhances the fact that he will come to you. He's got the payoff. Now, I've always thought that is free will, and it's driven by his evolutionary desire to get food. And I'm sort of, to use a horrible phrase, I'm hacking that evolutionary desire to get food, to get him to do what I need him to do, even though I'm doing it so that he's safe when we go out for a walk.
You could argue he's not choosing, he's just hungry, or he just enjoys the sensation of eating.
Yeah, he certainly does.
Doesn't mean he's decided to.
I guess so. Yeah.
A bit like a fly moving when you go to swat it. You know what I mean? It's programmed to do that, you could argue.
Yeah, annoying, isn't it?
I started thinking about bees while I was this.
Or the bee maidens.
Not the bee maidens. I would have got completely distracted. No, it's just that thing of, a bee stings, it dies.
Yeah.
That's a big choice to make if you're a creature, isn't it? I get that you would do it to protect the others in your hive, but it's an instinct as well, isn't it? I remember I got, I put my arm around a friend at school and he had a bee in his hood and it stung me. And I remember seeing the bee, as I was in pain, seeing the bee die. And I thought, well, thinking back on it, he wasn't protecting his hive. I just shocked it and it had stung me. But it had died in the process.
Yeah.
If it had free will, I know you could argue a bee doesn't have free will, and we do, but if you take it as a concept, to have free will, you'd never use your stinger, would you?
No, you probably wouldn't. Would you be able to convince a bee maiden to go for dinner with you? No. Goodness. Okay, so all this means then that, we mentioned it last time, it has implications for the very sort of basic phrase like fortune tellers, seers.
Yes. Definitely.
And what they're tapping into.
Yeah, remote viewing and all that kind of stuff. It's just all,
Akashic records.
Yeah. It does mess with your mind, doesn't it? I think you hit on the right thing. If we go with this theory that it is true that we don't have free will, the bigger question is why, isn't it? Why?
Yes.
Why don't we? That's a bigger question than whether we do or we don't, in a way.
I mean, so when Douglas Adams in Hitchhiker, he wrote about the Earth being a giant computer trying to work out what the meaning of life was.
Right.
That was commissioned by mice.
Yeah.
And everything that happened on Earth was part of a computer program.
Yeah.
That is, in a way,
it's the most logical way if you go with the concept we don't have free will.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, not that we're a computer trying to find the meaning of your universe.
No. But we're in a computer.
We're in a computer simulation.
Or we are a computer.
Yeah.
We just don't look like we think computers look. Because they're not the computers we've created. They don't look like us.
No, that's right. God, you've really made my brain hurt.
I know. I think next week I'm just going to do some ghost stories, or next time I do my episode, because it's slightly messy with my head. I think I'm going to go for that softer alternative, that if we don't have free will, it's not because everything's predetermined, but it's more we're being influenced by things that are around us. So,
The Derren Brown idea.
Exactly, yes. Now, some people might find that more scary because it means you're being manipulated into something. But then I guess you can argue, if a bit like your dog getting its treat, if it's being manipulated, it's enjoying it.
We wouldn't have an advertising industry if you couldn't be manipulated.
Yeah, exactly.
This episode is brought to you by Shaw Deodorant.
Sure. If you believe that we don't have free will, whether you believe the stronger version, that everything is predetermined or everything we do is just influenced by external and other factors, I'm going to go with that guy we talked about earlier. If it doesn't exist, just keep it to yourself for all our sakes, will you?
Yeah, amen to that.
Yeah.
Also, if you don't have free will, then there's a good percentage of listeners who will go to patreon.com/TQMpod.
Yeah.
And become a member, because it was prescribed when the universe itself exploded.
And it was prescribed that you would get our episodes a week early there. ad-free, that you would get an exclusive Patreon episode called Ben and Peter's Extra Scoop, access to our Discord server, and a lovely community to interact with. That was all predetermined. Just like me saying it every week.
Exactly. We could pre-record that bit.
Well, actually, if you are going to come and join us at Patreon for the Ben and Peter's Extra Scoop, come, because I am going to do a little test on Ben that might convince him that he doesn't have free will.
No, you're not.
And there's a couple of other, there was so much stuff, and thanks to Ruthie for sending so much of it through. I did read most of it. I know I've only focused on a couple of bits of it, but there's so much. And actually the other stuff I was reading, I may bring back in other episodes. But I'll talk about that a little bit more on the Extra Scoop as well. But yes, I think I'm just going to do some plain old, down the line, simple ghost stories next time I'm at the mic.
Excellent. Yeah. Perfect.
Good.
Right. I'm still researching mine, so I'm not going to give anything away just in case I have to reverse.
Cool. All right.
But we will see you next week. We will.
We will. We'll see you next time.
Take care.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Are you the quantum mechanics?